So I think I'm live now. um, yeah, looks like it's working. I am. I feel like an old person who's trying to figure out if their computer's working or not. Okay, let's get the URL going. No, that's all good. We don't need that. Let's see if poor. I've got poor stream health. So I wonder if that means I need to do some sort of buffering over here. Uh-oh. Got some baby crying noises in the background. He's going to bed soon. Right. I am going live here. Okay. So looks like we've got maybe one. Okay. I'm still getting everything figured out here, set up. So I think this is all up and working. I'm going to go ahead and just get started here and figure it out as I go. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Carl. I am a software engineer, and in the last couple of years, I've started speaking at conferences occasionally. One thing that I've been really interested in getting into is doing some live streaming like this, but also outlining kind of my process for speaking at conferences and coming up with conference talks and making sure that I've got all my information organized. And so that's what I'm going to be doing tonight. I also run a side project called CFP Land. It's basically a listing of all the calls for proposals that are open for speakers. And so because of that, I end up getting a lot of people who are interested in speaking kind of on my social media accounts and just talking with them at conferences and things like that. And so I'm hoping that this is kind of helpful for other people out there who might be interested in getting into public speaking or just kind of interested in what the process is like to compose and draft out a conference talk and do the slides, to kind of practice and refine those slides, etc. So I'm going to kind of go through the whole process, which is probably going to be way more detail and information than anybody would ever need. So hopefully I'll be able to someday edit these videos down and make something really more useful. But for now, I'm just going to live stream and record and see what happens. So to start off, tonight I am going through a talk that I got accepted at a couple of conferences this summer. One of those got canceled, and then one of them is online. And so it's called Improving Your PHP with Static Types. I've been writing PHP for many years, and one of the big challenges to it is it's a dynamically typed language without any form of type hinting. And a lot of people, I think this is one of those things that kind of probably comes and goes in waves in programming. Static type languages are really popular because have been really popular in the past because they prevent certain classes of errors, and they are really they're good when you have a large group of people that are all going to be working on the same code base, because refactoring gets easier when you know what strong types things are. On the other side, dynamically typed languages let you move really fast in the beginning. In the early days of a project, they let you get prototypes out quickly. They let you ensure that just get things together faster. So PHP, JavaScript, Python, all dynamically typed languages. You can sort of manipulate variables in ways to change what type they are during runtime. And there's no compile step that's going to check and sort of catch those errors for you. So anyway, PHP has evolved a lot as a programming language in the last few years. And one of the areas where it's evolving is it's getting a little more statically typed, and put a big asterisk by that, because really it's not. It's just that it is starting to include some features that are typically seen in statically typed languages. So that's things like class properties, function parameters, return types. And my sort of pitch for this talk is that developers are going to have to get used to and start to learn how to use these new features of the language to some extent, even if they don't use them every day. I think it's one of those things that's good to be aware of, because as it becomes more available, people will use it, and it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves, because we could end up getting like two on our front end project at the Grade Network, and that kind of forced me to get interested in what strong and static typing is and how it works, at least in TypeScript. TypeScript's kind of a unique case as well, because it's built on top of JavaScript, and JavaScript is another dynamically typed language. And so you're getting all these languages now I feel like there's this sort of movement towards stronger types, when in the last 10 years, it's been this movement away from stronger types, because that was too enterprisey, too slow. And so Python, Ruby, PHP, JavaScript all got really popular. And then now we're kind of drifting the other direction, where all these languages are now backing up and implementing some kind of strong typing. So it's kind of funny to see that in just my short career as a programmer. We have these like ebbs and flows of popularity of things. So the pitch for this talk I've been giving is it's like I want to dive into some examples of how statically typed PHP can help improve the developer experience, and then eliminate certain kinds of tests that aren't really necessary anymore, especially those ones that just check that the right type is being passed around. And then I'm also going to go over some of the downsides to strongly typed PHP when I do this talk. And so I think because it's kind of being implemented in an existing language that wasn't designed for it, it really does have some flaws. And so I'll be pretty straightforward about those. Okay, so let's just I'll kind of get you started with where I'm at today. So I know the talk title is going to be something like improving your PHP with static types. I want to be pretty actionable, and so I think that it's pretty straightforward to the point, but I think that I think if you're a developer writing PHP and you understand that all these different type hinting features are coming into the language, this is going to speak to you. And so simple, straightforward at this point. Maybe I'll work on something catchier, but honestly, I'm the kind of person that enjoys just doing a straightforward talk title rather than trying to get really clever. I'm not that clever or funny. The abstract I submitted, we've kind of been going over it, but it's basically just what I said, talking about how PHP is getting more statically typed features. Let's learn about them, and let's make sure that we understand their downsides. And we'll kind of come back to this abstract a few times, because when you submit a talk, the abstract is kind of the primary thing that the organizers look at when they decide whether or not to accept your talk. And so you really want to adhere to that abstract and fulfill its sort of, I think, it is the contract for the talk. So I want to do what I say I'm going to do in that abstract and not veer too far off base. Now, there's going to be some veering as you learn what the talk is really about and you start to dive into research, but we'll come back to that over and over. My two main goals with this talk are to inform developers, make sure they know how strong or static typing in PHP works, and inspire them to kind of show them how they can start using it today and some of the tools that are available to make it easier, as well as some of the maybe best practices or the problems they can run into if they do go this direction. I've got accepted for one talk. I think it's 45 minutes to an hour, somewhere in that range. So I don't remember exactly, but we'll plan on it being somewhere in that space of time. What I typically will do when I'm creating a new talk is I'll first write an outline. I'll then make some slides and then include any code samples along the way. And probably I'm going to do outline, then code samples, and then finally slides, and maybe there's some back and forth. I also am doing an article on the same topic for PHP Architect. So a lot of times they look at conference talks that have been either accepted or not accepted at conferences, and they will sort of make an offer to the author to write an article for the magazine. And so I've done this. I've written a couple articles that have gotten published there, so pretty familiar with that process. But basically, I'm going to take the same information from the talk and do it in an article. And actually, this is something you should take advantage of, because a lot of times, if I keep pitching this talk at other conferences in the future, it's actually going to be really helpful to have this article that I've already written on the topic, because it makes me kind of look like I know what I'm talking about. Plus, the event organizers can actually go get a preview of my talk from the article first. Okay, so the end of this whole process, I want to get a talk and an article done. Here's kind of what I'm thinking for how I'm going to go through this. So in the first live stream here, I'm going to work mostly on the outline and research phase. And the goal here is to come up with just roughly what is this talk going to look like? What are the main bullet points I want to hit? And I've already kind of started taking some really loose notes. And then I'm going to try to get any research done that I need to, or at least kind of some starting points on some research and the opening questions. This talk is a lot less opinion and personal experience based and a lot more sort of hardcore programming than I'm maybe used to doing. And I don't mind doing a variety of things, but this definitely is going to take some more research, some more learning. I'm not an expert in the history of programming languages or in static typing. And so in a way, this is kind of exciting because it's an opportunity for me to learn about this stuff, but also I think it's going to take a little more time in the research than some of my other talks. Next time, I'm hoping to get some code samples and talk about and just kind of go through what maybe actually start creating some of those code samples, just like examining what normal dynamically typed PHP versus strictly typed PHP would look like, or statically typed PHP would look like. And then I'm going to get into writing the slides by the third one. And usually what I do is I write out a first pass at the slides. So I'll make usually for a 45-minute talk, it's going to be somewhere between 40 and 50 slides. And so I'll be making all 40, 50 slides, and then I'll start practicing. And as I start practicing, I kind of refine those. So I'll end up removing some, I'll add some, I'll change around the wording, the whatever's on the slide. I do like my slides to be more minimal, so not a ton of words, but there's probably going to be some like key figures and dates that I want to just remember and get right. So I'll put those on the slide or in the speaker notes. And then finally, the last time, I'll be writing a blog post. And I don't know that I'm going to make this an actual live stream, so I put a question mark there because it's just writing a post, but I'll at least give maybe some outline on how I would go about that. Okay, so getting back to this topic at hand, statically typed PHP. I've been thinking about, even before I submitted this abstract anywhere, I kind of started thinking about an outline of what I wanted to talk about here. The first is I want to go over sort of a history of type systems in programming. And so I don't want to get into a ton of detail here within like going like hour or day by day and year by year through all the programming languages that exist. But I found an infographic that's just a quick high level history of programming. I think that'll be maybe a good starting point. I know in the 70s C was created, and it is statically typed, but there are some loopholes to that, and found an interesting question on Stack Overflow around that topic. I know that C++ and Objective-C, I think those came out in the 1980s, and both are statically typed, and I don't know a ton about either of those. I've written a little bit of C++, but not since college, so I'm going to have to sort of dive back into that to figure that out. And actually, that's the same link, so I need to find more about this. So that's definitely an area I want to do some research. And I think the C family of languages are pretty important for this topic particular, because PHP is it's sort of it's derived from C, so it's going to be a useful sort of benchmark for people. Let's see. Okay. Okay, and then in the let's see. I mean, really, you've got the 1990s to 2000s, maybe. There's like web languages starting to come around, and a lot of those are very dynamically typed. So I think it's going to be interesting to kind of cover a little bit in those. And then I mean, anytime between the 2010s to 2020s, so somewhere in that range, we start to like see a swing back towards strong typing, maybe. I don't know if there's any data to back that up. That's like a feeling I've gotten in programming for the last 10 years. I felt like when I started programming a little over 10 years ago, that we were all really hot in the web, especially we were hot on these dynamically typed languages. Now we've sort of swung the other direction. We're starting to be a little less jazzed about that, but maybe I'm wrong. I need to do more research on this. So this is what I typically will do, is kind of write an outline based on the things I do know, and then I'm going to sort of start linking in sources that either refute or confirm some of those things that I know. So honestly, this is a learning process. This isn't like I go into this knowing a ton about the topic of history of statically typed languages. I really don't. But I think it'll be really fun to get into reading about this stuff and summarizing some articles I find online. Okay. So there's a couple variations on static and strict and strong and dynamic typing, and there's some like maybe this section should be like language, but basically there's some subtleties of language. So a lot of people will call static and strongly typed and strictly typed, they'll kind of use those words interchangeably, and I probably do sometimes accidentally, but they're kind of different, and they have different levels of precision maybe. So I need to get into that, and I probably need to read more about like what level of precision on the words static, strong, and strict typing. So I need to get into that. That's definitely an area of research. I did find a really good, interesting article on the understanding the difference between static and dynamic typing. And so I've got that linked here in Hacker Noon. I'm going to get into reading that at some point. There's an interesting term called duck typing, which, if I remember right, that is like basically typing at the runtime. Let me see if that's right. Oh, it's just the inference, of a type. So if something looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. So the idea here is that if anything flies, then it could be a duck for the language in question. And so in dynamically typed languages, I think this is more common. Yeah, so we'll have to get into this too, and it's gonna be a lot of stuff I don't know. Okay, so this is my static versus strong typing answer on Stack Overflow that got me into thinking about some of this stuff. Actually, these are both good. I'm gonna put these underneath the so latent typing. I don't remember. I pulled this down. Somebody mentioned it, but I don't even remember what this is. Okay, so this is type system where types are associated with values, not variable. Oh, God. Okay, maybe I won't even get into that because I don't know the scheme language, so it may not be that relevant to what we're talking about here. And one thing I'm starting to, though, understand as I started reading the first few articles here is that very few languages are purely statically or dynamically typed. There's kind of this continuum, and some, I think, have even evolved type systems or removed those type systems in a way to an extent, or like gotten looser about their typing. So yeah, actually the way I want to say this is some evolved to be looser or stricter, and I need citations on that because I know I've heard this, but I have not worked with a ton with languages that have. So for example, I've mostly worked with JavaScript and PHP and a little Ruby and a little Python. So mostly pretty purely dynamically typed languages. Getting into TypeScript as a form of JavaScript, sort of, or something that compiles to JavaScript, I guess. I don't know what you really transpiles to JavaScript. Anyway, getting into TypeScript is kind of like sort of a variation on JavaScript, but I wouldn't call that the evolution of the core JavaScript language. So PHP is really a good example of a language starting to evolve more static typing, or whatever you want to call it. I think really in a strict sense of the word, I don't feel like PHP really has static typing. What I feel like PHP has is sort of strong type hinting in a way. So I'm going to kind of try to make that distinction as I get going. And then, so next section, again, this is like really loose, high level outline of what I want to cover in the first section. So this is probably just looking at it. I'm guessing this is 10 slides, maybe. Usually I can get one bullet point per slide, one high level bullet point per slide. I just need to work on sort of knowing all the content there. So these are some of the things I want to touch on, but it's good to, I don't like to get into the details until I've got a good high level view first. I feel like I'm just getting a high level view right now. So I'm going to skip over all the minutia that I can get into when I research all these topics, which will be interesting, but like totally not that helpful when I think about like I need to prioritize how big of a deal is this section. So if I think about this section as maybe 10 slides, so it's maybe a fifth or so of the content, which is good. I think I have 5 sections, so that's perfect. And that means I don't want to go too much deeper and have too much content in this first section, because I've got to cover 4 more sections, and maybe I'll change things up, but that's kind of a way to think about it. So next is getting into a history of typing in PHP. So this is the language that we're actually talking about. So I want to anchor people in where this has come from. I know there's some type hinting introduced in PHP 5.6, but I think it was pretty limited. So I'm going to kind of cover that, and then more in PHP 7, and then there's actually more coming in PHP 8. So PHP did a funny thing, and they skipped from PHP 5.6 straight up to PHP 7.0. So yeah, there was an attempt at PHP 6 and it never happens. They just scrapped it and said we'll go to 7. So PHP 5.6 started to introduce some type hinting. PHP 7 got us even more. And it is really like PHP is not truly static typing, because PHP is not a compiled language. So there is no checking done at compile time, and it doesn't actually even check the types at runtime unless that function is actually run. So when you add type hinting to a function or return type to a function, PHP doesn't actually run that until you hit that function. So that can be a little bit tricky, and that this is kind of one of those gotchas. Maybe I'll put this here. So PHP doesn't run type checking until the code itself is run. So it's truly like dynamic. Now there's ways around that. So you can, I guess I'll call it circumvent via linting. And one thing, this is a trick that I've gotten into using quite a bit with statically typed PHP projects, is to use heavy linting rules that force you to put those static types in. And then there's probably even a PHP static analysis tool that'll tell you if you have type mismatching. But I'm not sure about that. That's interesting. Where should I put that? Yeah, I need it. You see if there's something like that in here. Okay. So history of typing in PHP, I know that it was introduced in 5.6. There's more in 7. There's more coming in 8, but I'm going to talk about the like future of static PHP towards the end. So I'm not going to get into that yet. I'm going to talk about that's really type hinting and not static typing. And so maybe this is where I get into difference between static, strong, and strict, maybe. I know I put it up here at the top, but I could probably move this down into this section. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. Okay, so I got a pretty short section there, just a couple bullet points. I may want to do some more in here. And then I have what is static PHP and why use it. I don't know if that's the way I want to say this. So let's kind of go back to the abstract. Every now and then when I'm starting to feel like I might be off base, I try to just jump back up to the abstract and be like, okay, what was I telling people that I'm going to give them in this talk, and am I actually going to deliver that? So as PHP incorporates more features of typical of statically typed languages, developers need to adjust to a completely new style of programming in PHP. While many applaud these features, PHP's implementation isn't quite the same as many traditionally statically typed languages. It's kind of a mouthful. So there are limitations and pitfalls to be aware of. this talk, we'll dive into several examples of how statically typed PHP can improve developer experience and code quality while eliminating a whole class of unit tests. Okay, so I think this is like the meat of this talk. This is where I need to probably spend the most time, and it's going to be the most actionable when I think about my two goals, informing and action, like making this actionable. It's probably in these examples. So I'm going to just copy this part of here. And I'm going to put this here as a reminder. So what is static PHP and why use it? In this talk, we'll dive into several examples of how statically typed PHP can improve developer experience and code quality while eliminating the need for a whole class of unit tests. So this is an area I've already been thinking about some. And I'm going to go ahead and just put this right up here. Because I think the best way to show people, or the best way to sort of demonstrate what strongly typed or strictly typed PHP is going to give you is to show examples. So these are my examples that I initially came up with. Actually, some of these are kind of edge casey weird things that I'm going to put. This is going here. Okay. Okay. So some examples here. So functions in PHP can get these return types and parameter types, I guess is what we call those. Classes can have type properties. And methods, which are just functions. You can, this is kind of a, I don't know, I feel like that's kind of just a pro tip. So I'm going to put that at the bottom. You can declare strict types to eliminate type coercion. Now, PHP is still not the strictest when it comes to type coercion, even when you use strict types, but maybe I'll put an example of that. Wonder. Yeah. Yeah, this is something I probably should spend some time on. That's not how you spell coercion? I don't know how to spell. No. Okay, that doesn't look right, but that's fine. So declaring strict types, you can eliminate type coercion, set up linting, and that will sort of enforce usage of strong types. So this is where I feel like this is the area I can spend a bulk of my time. So if I only spend 10 or 15 minutes introducing it, that's probably plenty. This is where people are going to be most engaged. So I want to spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes on that part, 30 minutes on this part, and then 5, 10 towards the end. That feels like good timing. I want to show how it can replace certain unit tests. This is one that I think is super compelling because I like testing code, but I also find tests somewhat tedious, especially ones for weird edge cases that you don't expect to happen. So I like typing for that. I think another thing I want to show is safety and refactoring. I'm kind of like, basically what I'm doing is I'm listing what I know are some advantages to using strict typing, but also ways you can use it. And I want to get really concrete with these examples when I'm actually building it. So I'm going to have to think about that a little bit, but it's kind of what I'm thinking. This is one that I have found type hinting to be very useful for safety and refactoring. Dealing with multiple return types, this is kind of I'm going to call this one of those shortcoming quirk things. And that's what union types are. So there is a way to, like, about nullable types. Nullable, yeah, okay. And then catching type errors is something that can be helpful if you intentionally want to be forgiving, or maybe, I don't know. Honestly, I feel like that's something that you probably should, maybe it's a smell, like you shouldn't be doing that, but maybe I'll get into that later. I think that kind of covers all the, maybe what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna say, are there more PHP type hinting features available? I need research on that. I'm pretty sure that covers all of them that I've used, but I've only used really strict PHP type rules on one project right now, and so it's a side project, so I'm not super deep, and a lot of these features are kind of like coming as we go. So PHP 8 I think will be coming out later maybe this year, maybe next year, but either way it is going to introduce a little more on top of this stuff. And then some advantages with examples. This thread was kind of interesting as people talking about some of the advantages of strongly typed languages and debating whether they reduce bugs. I'm just trying to decide if I want to like illustrate like bugs that could be caught with strict typing. I'm just going to put a question there and put this up under there. Okay, we'll go with that. So I think this is a good, I feel like if you spend a minute on each of these, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I've got at least 9 things already, and then let's say there's another. So this is at least 10 minutes already. Probably more. So probably need more stuff here. So may have to do some research on that end. Okay, and then this next section, what I feel like is, it's like, if you're going to show the advantages, you should show the disadvantages. It's the only way to be honest. And so the last section I'm really talking about, like, I'm just going to call this advantages to stronger types in PHP. I don't know. I don't love that title. But there's shortcoming and quirks of the PHP's type system, and big ones are the way type coercion still kind of isn't super strict. So things that are null and false kind of evaluate the same way in 0, so you have to be careful about those sorts of things. And then they don't have generics, and generics are a pretty cool feature that TypeScript has, and most real strictly typed languages have, but it's apparently tough to implement in PHP. And I feel like I saw something. Yeah, so at one point I was talking to somebody in the PHP internals world about generics. Generics are like where let's say I have an array of something, like an array of events. This could be a valid type if you use generics. And the thing within here is a generic. It's basically like an array of something, a collection of something. And it's really useful because otherwise these collection type objects like arrays don't really tell you about what's contained within them. And the only way to do it is, right now there's the hack is doc blocks, which I don't love doc blocks in general. I think it's just like a crutch. So there's a hack though to get this a little bit. We also don't have union types, which basically is like the multiple return types. You can do nullable, but the only way to get like multiple objects that could be returned by a function is to do this interface hack. And I think this is the link here, but basically you just have you make both the classes implement an empty interface, and then you say it can return this or this. And instead of saying this or this, you say it can return this interface. So I want to show an example of that as like, if you want to implement strict typing and you need this sort of union type, but it doesn't exist right now in PHP, this is the way to do it, but it sucks. And just acknowledge that. Another thing I ran into is getting the property type from a class is not, there's no great built-in way to do this, because those property type annotations are kind of like, I don't know, just decoration. They're not really part of core PHP. So when you want to get it, you have to use reflection classes, which are always a little bit like risky and tricky, because they aren't the real class you're actually working with. So I don't love that, but it is possible. So I'm going to show an example of that, because I ended up writing something like that. And then I kind of want to do more research on how types are implemented in PHP itself. So more research here, because this might indicate why some of these shortcomings exist. For example, PHP doesn't run the type checking until the code itself is run. And the only way to circumvent that is through some kind of linting. And this is like not quite as nice as a language that runs it at compile time, because then it'll tell you before it even builds your code and gets it out to a server, hey, there's an error here. Whereas with PHP's type hinting running at runtime, you basically have to wait until that function is actually called to get any feedback on whether it works or not. So you almost have to combine type hinting with testing in order to get the most out of it. And so let's do some more research there too. So in the last section, I want to cover maybe some tools or projects that make static typing in PHP easier. So one that I've already used is this Slevomat coding standards with Code Sniffer. Code Sniffer is a pretty popular linter for PHP that basically tells you if you're making common coding errors and cleans up your formatting. And then Slevomat has a bunch of extra coding standards on top of that that are especially surrounding strict typing. So you can enforce like things must have return types, parameters must have parameter types, type hinted on them, things like that. And then I want to see if maybe there's a static analysis tool to check types. There's probably other things that I'm not aware of yet, so I need to get into digging around on GitHub and seeing what I can find. And then I know there's a couple things coming in PHP 8 or beyond, union types being one of them, which I'm pretty excited about. And then the talk of generics, although I don't think it's going to happen in 8, but I want to talk to some people about this, and probably need to do some more research on what is so far looking to come out in PHP 8, because I honestly have not. It's like way too far in the future. I don't know. Okay, so at this point, I've got goals. I want a 45-minute talk, and I've got, let's say I had 10, maybe 15 minutes on my intro. These two. I've probably got 20 minutes here so far in this section, so that's pretty good. And right now I've probably got 5-10 minutes. So I mean, if I stretched this, I feel like I could get it to 45 minutes. I find that when giving an actual talk to real people, a lot of times maybe it's just all the filler, but I end up like talking a lot more than if I had just written it. So a lot of times writing, it could be pretty terse because I'm like going through and editing that, cleaning stuff up all the time. Whereas talking in front of people, and it's like I probably have a tendency to ramble. So it's probably good if I get a little more content in here and then like figure out how to condense that down just a bit, so I can force myself to go a little faster. But not a bad first stab at an outline. And this is mostly based off stuff that I already knew going into this, but then sort of leaving myself room for these things like more research needed. I'm going to kind of star these lines with more research needed. Yeah. So from here, I've got like, maybe 8, 10 bullet points of research that I want to do. And so I'm not going to do that live. Just going to kind of dig in, but I think I'll at least have a loose structure. Now, one thing that I would really like to figure out how to incorporate in this kind of talk, it is very informative, but I'd like to get some kind of story here. And I've thought about a couple ways to do that. One would be maybe something in the history section. So maybe I can find some kind of story about a company moving to a statically typed language, or maybe I can come up with figure out a story, interesting story of how a programming language was created with static types or changed to have them or something like that. So I need to maybe dig around for that. Another way maybe that I could do some kind of story would be, like I've thought about applying some of the hero's journey type thing to this this 0.3 advantages to stronger types, and like going through these examples. So you could start out with like a really messy bunch of code that's not very clear as to what types things are, and then you could kind of slowly refactor it using types. That might be an interesting sort of thread to follow. And so maybe I can make these one contiguous story. I don't know. I have to think about that. Yeah. So I'll look for stories here. Yeah, so that's something else to think about. Okay. All right, so I feel like I've got a pretty good working first outline, and I have some points where I want to go do some research, so I'm going to go off and do that. Next time when I come back, I'm going to be doing code samples, and so basically taking the slightly cleaned up outline here with a little more research and probably some slightly more details filled out, and I'm going to then sort of take these example sections and start building out some code samples to show how these things will work. I have a pretty good idea how most of these are going to work already because I've gotten to use quite a bit of this, but that'll definitely take some thinking, a little bit of research, a little more live coding, and then I'll get to actually creating the slides once I have those code samples, because what I'm going to want to do is take screenshots of the code samples and integrate them into slides, as well as figure out some some good high quality images to use for the rest of these slides, and then practice and refining will be next. So looking forward to next time.